Lily Thompson had always been the spark in her family's life. At just 7 years old, she had a laugh that could brighten even the gloomiest day and an imagination that turned the backyard into a world of castles, dragons, and flying adventures. Whether she was dancing in the living room or building forts out of blankets, Lily had a way of making life feel magical. Her best friend in all of this was Max, a gentle golden retriever who had been part of the family since Lily was just a baby. Where Lily went, Max followed. But slowly, something began to change. At first, Lily just seemed a little tired. Her parents, Emma and Daniel, thought it might be a cold or maybe the flu. She began to nap more often and wasn't as interested in her favorite games. Then came the bruises, the unexplained aches, and the nights she would wake up crying, saying her legs hurt. Emma's smile started to fade, and Daniel began spending his evenings searching for answers online, dreading what they might find. After several doctor visits, tests, and anxious weeks of waiting, the Thompsons received the news no parent is ever prepared to hear. Lily had a rare and aggressive illness that was progressing faster than anyone expected. Despite every effort, the specialists gently told them there was little more they could do. The prognosis was grim. Lily likely had only a few days left. Emma dropped to her knees in the hospital hallway, her cries echoing down the sterile corridor. Daniel stood still, unable to move, gripping the edge of a chair like it was the only thing holding him up. The air felt heavy, like time had stopped. Lily, too young to fully understand, simply held Max's leash and said, "It's okay, Mommy. Max will help me feel better." With tears in their eyes and hearts breaking, Emma and Daniel made the decision to take Lily home. If her time was truly short, they wanted her surrounded by love, warmth, and the comfort of her own bed, not the cold beep of hospital machines. Hospice care was arranged. A small hospital bed was placed in the living room, near the window where Lily loved to sit and read, and Max, sensing something was wrong, refused to leave her side. The house that once rang with laughter was now filled with quiet sobs and whispered prayers. But in the middle of all the sadness, one thing remained constant: Max's quiet, watchful presence beside the little girl he loved more than anything in the world. The first night back home was the hardest. The house felt unfamiliar, even though they'd lived there for years. The cheerful toys, the drawings on the fridge, the family photos, everything now seemed frozen in time, like relics of a life that had suddenly slipped out of reach. The living room had been transformed into a small medical space. Lily's bed was placed by the window so she could see the backyard where she used to play with Max. There were soft blankets, a few of her favorite stuffed animals, and a small table with picture books stacked neatly. Max curled up beside her the moment she was settled, pressing his head gently against her arm. He didn't bark or beg for food. He simply lay there, eyes wide open, as if he understood what no one else could say out loud. As nurses explained how to manage Lily's comfort and medications, Emma tried to keep her composure. She smiled for Lily's sake, but the cracks in her voice betrayed her. Daniel sat nearby, holding Lily's tiny hand in both of his, silent and still. He hadn't slept in over 24 hours. Later that evening, when the nurses left and the house was quiet again, Emma sat on the edge of Lily's bed and whispered, "Is there anything you want to do, sweetheart? Anything we can get for you?" Lily didn't hesitate. She turned her head slightly and said softly, "I just want Max to stay with me." Emma nodded, biting back tears. "He's not going anywhere," she promised. From that moment on, Max became more than a companion. He became a silent guardian. He followed the nurses every time they came in. If a machine beeped or Lily stirred in her sleep, Max was the first to react. He slept only when Lily did, waking the moment she moved. He even refused his meals unless they were brought to her bedside. Family and close friends visited over the next few days, each goodbye heavier than the last. But Lily remained calm, cradled in Max's warmth. She stroked his fur with weak fingers and whispered little secrets into his ears, stories only they would ever know. Despite her fading strength, she smiled when Max licked her hand or rested his chin on her arm. "He understands me," she told her grandmother one afternoon. Even when I don't say anything, Max knows. And somehow, in that quiet space between sorrow and love, her final wish was already being fulfilled. Days turned into a blur. Emma and Daniel settled into a routine, managing Lily's care while trying to stay strong for her. But each time they looked at their daughter, frail and barely responsive, their hearts broke all over again. The house that was once filled with the sounds of laughter and play now seemed overwhelmingly quiet. But there was one constant in the room: Max. Max had always been a calm, gentle dog, but in these days he became something more. His loyalty wasn't just out of habit or love. It seemed to be born from something deeper, something unspoken. He watched over Lily like a sentry, always alert, never leaving her side. If she shifted in bed or sighed in her sleep, Max would be the first to react. His ears would perk up, and he'd move closer, resting his head gently on her lap or curling up at her feet. One evening, as the fading sun cast a golden glow over the room, Emma sat by Lily's bedside, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Lily had been unresponsive for hours, her tiny body still and cold. Emma couldn't help but think that the end was near. She stroked her daughter's hand, willing some warmth back into her fingers. Max, who had been lying quietly beside Lily's bed, suddenly sat up. His head tilted toward her, his eyes locking onto hers. There was something in his gaze, intense, urgent. Max stood, then walked slowly to the side of the bed. He gently nudged Lily's arm with his nose, his body trembling with an energy Emma hadn't seen before. Emma watched, confused and slightly startled by the sudden movement. "Max," she whispered. "What's wrong, boy?" Max looked at Lily once more, his eyes unwavering, then let out a soft, low bark. It wasn't frantic, but it was insistent, like he was trying to tell him something. Lily stirred at the sound, her fingers twitching. Max nudged her once more, this time placing his head directly on her chest, close to her heart. There was an undeniable moment of silence, as if the world itself had stopped to watch. Then, without warning, Lily's eyes fluttered open. Her breath, shallow and weak, became a little steadier. Her lips parted slightly, and with the faintest of smiles, she whispered, "Max." Max's tail thumped the floor gently, and Emma, overwhelmed with emotion, pressed her hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. It was a miracle, however small, and they knew in that moment that something had changed, something extraordinary had happened. Max had given her the push she needed, a sign of hope when the world seemed to offer none. The room was still. For a moment, it felt as if time itself had suspended, holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. Emma could barely believe what had just happened. Lily, who had been so still and unresponsive, was now blinking up at her, her eyes not completely focused but undeniably open. Max, his golden fur gleaming in the soft light, continued to nuzzle Lily's chest, his body warm and solid against hers. "Lily?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. She reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing it gently. "Sweetheart, are you awake?" Lily's eyelids fluttered as if she were trying to grasp onto the reality around her. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. Slowly, her gaze shifted toward Emma, then back to Max, who had not left her side. For a long moment, there was silence, and Emma thought she might lose her daughter again, just as quickly as she had gotten her back. And then, in the softest voice, Lily spoke. "Max, he's here." Her voice was faint, barely above a whisper, but it was there. She smiled weakly, reaching her hand toward Max, who immediately licked her fingers with his warm, comforting tongue. Emma's heart leaped. This wasn't a dream. Lily, her precious little girl, had just awakened. Her dog, Max, was somehow the bridge between this world and whatever place she had been. Emma's throat tightened as tears welled up in her eyes. "I'm here, darling," she said softly. "You're not alone." Max, as if sensing the shift in energy, rested his head gently on Lily's lap, his tail giving a slow thump on the floor. The bond between them, so deep and unspoken, seemed to fill the room. Lily ran her fingers through his fur, and for the first time in days, her face seemed lighter. The weight of illness hadn't vanished, but there was a glimmer of something else. Hope. "Mommy, I feel better," Lily murmured, her voice so small but filled with an undeniable sweetness. Her words were a miracle in themselves. Emma couldn't contain herself anymore. She cried, not just tears of sorrow, but of relief, of gratitude. She had feared the worst, but this moment was proof that there was still fight left in her daughter. Emma pulled Lily into a gentle hug, feeling Mac's warm body pressed against both of them. The nurse who had been on call rushed in after hearing the commotion. She checked Lily's vitals quickly, her brow furrowing in surprise. "I don't know how to explain this," the nurse said softly, "but there's definitely a change. Her heart rate is stronger. She's more alert. This is something we didn't expect." Lily, still cuddled up with Max, smiled up at her mother. "I'm not ready to go yet, Mommy," she whispered, her eyes bright for the first time in days. Emma kissed the top of her head. "I know, sweetheart. I know." In that moment, everything felt possible again. The days that followed felt like a delicate balance between disbelief and wonder. Lily's condition, once so fragile and unyielding, seemed to shift imperceptibly with each passing hour. Her strength was returning slowly, like a fragile flame flickering to life after a long, cold night. Emma and Daniel couldn't help but marvel at the change, though they knew better than to get their hopes up too quickly. There were no guarantees. The doctors had said the damage was too extensive, that her body was simply too weak. Yet day after day, Lily's improvement was undeniable. The first sign that something was different came the morning after she had stirred. Lily's eyes were open again, brighter than they had been in days. Max was curled up beside her, his presence unwavering. He had barely slept since the moment Lily had woken up, as if he knew something vital had changed. "Mommy, I want some juice," Lily whispered, her voice a little stronger, though still soft. The request was simple, but it sent a wave of relief through Emma's chest. A request, something normal. It was a sign that Lily was beginning to come back to life, even if just a little. Emma rushed to prepare the juice, her hands trembling. When she returned with a small glass, Lily was sitting up slightly in her bed, propped up with pillows. Max was still close by, his nose nuzzling her hand. "Here, sweetie," Emma said, gently holding the cup to Lily's lips. She took a small sip, her eyes closing in satisfaction. It was only a little bit, but it was progress. "I want to play with Max," Lily murmured, looking at her dog with a tenderness that melted Emma's heart. "Can we go outside, Mommy?" Emma hesitated. The backyard, where Lily used to play freely with Max, seemed like a world away. But there was something in Lily's eyes, something in the way she was holding herself, a spark that Emma hadn't seen in days. "Okay, sweetie," Emma said, smiling through the tears that she could no longer hold back. "We'll go outside." With the help of a walker, Emma carefully assisted Lily as they made their way to the back door. Max was right there, tail wagging, as if he knew this moment was important. He gently nudged Lily's hand, as if giving her the courage to take each small step. When they reached the backyard, the fresh air was like a balm to Emma's soul. Lily looked around, her gaze soft, as if taking in the world for the first time in a long while. She bent down, her fingers brushing the grass, and Max followed her, sitting at her feet as if guarding her from the world. Lily laughed, a soft, weak laugh, but a laugh nonetheless. "I'm not ready to go yet, Mommy," she said again, her voice steady and sure this time. In that moment, Emma knew that the battle wasn't over. There was still hope, a glimmer that refused to fade. And with Max by her side, Lily had found the strength to keep fighting. As Lily's condition continued to improve, something remarkable began to happen. Word of her recovery and Max's unwavering loyalty spread like wildfire. At first, it was just family and close friends, but soon enough, the story of the little girl who had been given days to live and the dog who seemed to bring her back from the brink was shared far and wide. The local community rallied around the Thompsons. Neighbors brought food, flowers, and cards, each one containing messages of hope and encouragement. Some sent handmade quilts, others baked pies, all with one common theme: love and support. And through it all, Max was the star, his golden fur and gentle eyes appearing in nearly every photo. Lily's story caught the attention of a local news reporter, and one afternoon, a cameraman and reporter knocked on the Thompsons' door, asking to share the story on the evening news. Emma was hesitant at first, unsure if it was too soon or too raw to open their lives to the public. But after a long conversation with Daniel, they both agreed that the story might inspire others, give hope to those in similar situations who felt alone. The segment aired that evening, and before the night was over, messages from all over the country began flooding in. People shared their own stories of animals, providing comfort, strength, and healing during difficult times. A flood of support poured in for the Thompsons, with people offering prayers, gifts for Lily, and donations to help with medical expenses. The hospital, too, was amazed at the story. They had never witnessed anything quite like this, and many staff members visited Lily, bringing small gifts and expressing their admiration for her fight and Max's role in it. Max became a local hero. Schools invited the family to assemblies where children heard about Lily's recovery and saw the bond between her and her loyal dog. Local businesses held fundraising events, and even animal shelters asked if they could showcase Max's story as an example of the powerful bond between humans and animals. His image appeared in local papers with the headline, "Max the Miracle Dog." Lily, who was still recovering, was overwhelmed by the love and attention. She shyly accepted cards, gifts, and letters, but it was Max who took center stage. Wherever they went, people wanted to meet the dog who had saved Lily's life. He became a symbol of hope, a living reminder that sometimes the greatest miracles don't come from medicine, but from the pure love and loyalty between a dog and a child. The Thompsons, despite their initial reluctance to share their journey, soon realized that their story had become something bigger than themselves. It had touched hearts across the nation, reminding people of the power of love and the healing that can come from unexpected places. As the weeks went by, Lily's recovery continued to surprise everyone, herself included. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic change. It was more like a slow, steady awakening, a process so fragile and precious that every little step forward felt like a victory. With Max by her side, Lily's strength seemed to grow each day, and the Thompsons began to allow themselves to hope, just a little, that their daughter might not only survive but thrive. Lily began to regain some of her energy. At first, it was small things, sitting up for longer periods of time, taking short walks around the living room, and even eating a little more at each meal. But as the days turned into weeks, those small steps turned into bigger ones. One morning, after a week of sitting in a wheelchair, Lily took her first steps, albeit with the help of a walker, into the backyard. Max was right there beside her, his tail wagging excitedly, as though he knew this was another important milestone in Lily's healing journey. "Mommy, look, I'm walking." Lily beamed, her voice full of pride. "I'm walking with Max." Max trotted alongside her, as though he'd been waiting for this moment all along. He would nudge Lily's hand with his nose, as if urging her on, and then bark softly, encouraging her to take another step. Emma watched from the doorway, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. She had been so afraid of losing her daughter, and now here she was, slowly but surely, reclaiming her life. Lily's doctors, too, were astounded. The recovery was still fragile, but it was clear that her progress was beyond what they had expected. "It's a miracle," one of her doctors remarked, shaking his head in disbelief. "Her strength, her resilience. It's something we rarely see. I've never seen anything quite like it." The most important part of Lily's recovery wasn't just the physical healing, it was the emotional one. She had been through so much in such a short period of time, and Max had been there through it all. As Lily's body began to heal, so did her spirit. She laughed more, spoke more, and most importantly, she began to dream again. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch with Max by her side, Lily told her mother that she wanted to be a doctor when she grew up. "I want to help people like I needed help," she said, her voice full of determination. "But I'll always need Max with me, like my best friend." Emma smiled, her heart overflowing with love and pride. "I'm sure you'll be amazing, sweetheart," she said, brushing a lock of hair from Lily's face. The healing wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual, and driven by a bond that could never be broken. And through it all, Max remained Lily's steadfast companion, her protector, and the one constant she could count on. They had both fought the odds, and together, they had come out stronger than ever. Months passed, and the healing continued. Lily's recovery wasn't without challenges, but it was undeniable. She went from being a frail little girl, barely able to speak or move, to a vibrant, energetic child who laughed freely and ran through the backyard, chasing Max as they played together. There were still days when she would grow tired or need a rest, but each day brought more strength, more life. And each day, Max was there, her ever-present guardian, her devoted companion. Lily's doctors were amazed at her progress. No one could explain the sudden turn of events, the miraculous recovery that had unfolded right before their eyes. But for the Thompsons, the answer was simple. They knew it wasn't just medicine or treatment that had brought their daughter back. It was the unwavering bond between Lily and Max, a connection so powerful that it had transcended the very limits of what seemed possible. One day, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Emma reflected on everything that had happened. The endless days in the hospital, the nights filled with uncertainty, and the overwhelming grief they had felt when the doctors gave them the impossible news. But through it all, there had been one constant: Max. "I never knew just how much one dog could mean," Emma said softly, her eyes welling up with tears. "Max saved her, Daniel. He truly saved her." Daniel, who had been sitting next to her, nodded in agreement, his hand resting gently on Emma's. "I believe that," he said quietly. "I've seen it with my own eyes. There's something about the way Max is with her. He gave her something no doctor could hope." Lily, who had been playing in the yard, ran up to them with Max following closely behind. She collapsed into Emma's lap, her arms wrapping tightly around her mother. "I'm going to be okay, Mommy. I'm not going anywhere," she said, her voice full of confidence. She looked down at Max, who sat beside them, tail wagging in approval. "We'll always be together." Tears streamed down Emma's face as she hugged her daughter tightly, feeling the weight of the moment. They had come so far, and they had done it together. Emma knew that Lily's journey wasn't over, but it was now one of hope, possibility, and a future filled with love. Max, the dog who had never given up on Lily, who had always been there when she needed him the most, was not just a hero, he was family. And as long as Lily had Max by her side, there was nothing she couldn't face. The bond between a girl and her dog is something that defies explanation. It's a connection that goes beyond words, beyond science, beyond understanding. It's a bond that can heal, that can bring strength when everything else seems lost. Max had given Lily back her life, and in return, he had found a love that would last a lifetime.